Hi everybody, this is Dr. Ruben Valdez, your host of Under the Avocado Tree Podcast, where we strive to give you the most up-to-date and applicable information in order to be able to take the best care of yourself and make those great everyday decisions. Today I am incredibly excited because I'm sitting here with one of my good friends, Fernando Rodriguez. He is a leader, a thought leader in the mental health industry. He is a mental health professional with a pretty large resume, and I'm going to give you just a few highlights. He's been working in and has worked around some of the best mental health institutions around the country. He's a consultant and has been a consultant for multiples of these centers. He now has and leads a very powerful team of intervening mental health professionals. And so the resume just goes on and on. This guy knows a lot about mental health, and today I want to have him speak a little bit about what he does, and we're going to give it a very interesting perspective because we're all on lockdown. We're living through a time of crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic. This is generating a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of fear. Fear for our health, for the health of our families, financial fears, relationship fears, and Fernando, being an expert in his field, has been gracious enough to come on today and help us understand what are some of the successful strategies that we can take on as individuals, as families around the country, in order to best face some of the challenges that this pandemic is bringing on. So thank you so much for being on today, Fernando.
I appreciate you having me here.
We're both disinfected here, so
we
can go ahead and shake hands today.
Are. That was a Purell handshake.
For sure. So Fernando, I know that your resume is large and extensive. Help us and help the listeners understand a little bit about your background and,
Sure.
and what it is that you do.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, appreciate the opportunity, and for all of you that are listening, I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you for the work that you do in your profession, and I've known you for a very long time also. A little bit of my background. So I've been working in the mental health and co-occurring substance use disorder field for a very long time. I would say now 16 years or so, and it just keeps adding on. I'm not going anywhere. I've worked in a lot of very different levels of care: residential behavioral. I've worked with in outpatient clinics. I've worked in one-on-one with patients, in group settings. I've also worked with a number of populations, everything from people that do have means and affluence, all the way to community-based, grant-based programs where I've had rival gang members in my groups, and also with people from Wall Street and people that can do that have access, and to me the number one thing is that, if anything I've learned, is that every single human being is their own story, is a world of their own, and they have their own combination of things that makes them who they are, and with that comes assets and strengths, but also weaknesses and problems, and in where we're at right now with this COVID-19 pandemic, there's a lot of talk about what's going on with work, what's going on with the economy, what's going on with all these different aspects, with government, with traveling, all the external pieces of our lives, and I feel like we haven't been doing justice to talking about our internal worlds and what's going on, so I think that this is a great opportunity to speak to a piece that I believe is not being spoken about, and that is as important.
So Fernando, before we began, you were making a statement to me that made a lot of sense, where there's a reality right now. And as much as we individually would want to change this reality and what's going on, it really is kind of beyond our control. And a lot of the narrative that's out there and the stuff that people tend to tell each other might not really be what we need right now. So let's open the conversation up there.
Sure. So I studied formally positive psychology for a year after post grad, and it's one of the things that I really respect about the mental health field is starting to figure out not just pathology and what's wrong, but also what's right and what works, you know. And positive psychology has nothing to do with positive thinking. And I think a lot of people out there, it's a study of how positive actions impact your life, right? And I think that a lot of people are, when we're faced with problems, when we feel inadequate or incapable of fixing things for others, all we can do is say something that's positive, you know, and it comes out of a sense of inadequacy and not knowing what to do. And that's okay. The problem with expressing a sense of maybe false hope, I guess you might want to share, and I know that for some people that's not going to resonate, but when we don't know what to do or what to say, we usually try to soothe people with a sense of hope, and there's nothing wrong with losing hope, but what also works and what also is really important is to acknowledge and understand the reality that we're facing, that what we're facing just sucks, and being able to validate with each other that we're going through something that sucks together is actually more connecting than just trying to tell somebody, hey, you know, this is going to blow over anytime soon. Because the reality is that we have no clue when this is going to end. So it's not based on truth. Anytime soon is a very elusive time frame. So like the reality that what I rather tell somebody is like, hey, as long as this is going on, we're going to support each other. That is a more factual statement. More concrete, you know. So the way we share communication with each other, it has a huge impact in how we relate and how we co-regulate each other. You know, if we're talking about, there's a whole science field in mental health about what's called interpersonal neurobiology, and basically is the concept that we co-regulate each other. So we activate each other up, or we can bring people down. We can down-regulate each other's emotional states, right? So we want, in this time of crisis and this time of so much uncertainty, like what's really important, that we learn how to co-regulate each other in a way that actually you are helping people calm as opposed to escalating each other. You know.
Because sorry to interrupt you, but from an application standpoint, what are some of the things around this specific crisis that you're hearing people telling each other, and then what would be some of the verbiage that we should maybe embrace that would put this neurobiology co-regulation tool into effect?
Sure. So first of all, that's a great question. First of all, the number one thing, like I stated earlier, right? Like accepting that this sucks, and like telling people that we're in this together, and finding your own language of how to do that, right? Like, because just a statement, we're in this together, can become very stale, right? But before talking about the language, what I say is what I'm hearing and the situations, everyone's lives has changed so drastically.
In a very short period
of time, right? So now we're having people, you know, like taking a break from our family members or from our loved ones because we're able to go to work. Like that's a normal part of life. Now we are kind of stuck with each other. So I'm hearing a lot of people, things that were already there underneath the surface that are coming up. So this social distancing and people having to be on lockdown is exacerbating, or it's making worse things that were kind of already there that were unattended. So any unhealthy aspects of our relationships with each other, right? Any unhealthy aspects of our own self. So the people that live with low-grade depression, that are able to go outside and take care of themselves and go places and distract themselves with work, with relationships, with, you know, life things that happen every day. all of a sudden are stuck. So people that are having anxiety, and depression and anxiety for us is like the common cold of mental health.
Mhm.
Like there is a certain level that everybody gets to experience at some point in life, right? And now we are stuck with our own selves, with our own internal dialogue, and other people's depressions and anxiety
Dynamics, yeah.
and dynamics, and we are unable to distract each other with life.
Mhm.
Because life continues to happen, and life is dynamic, and now life is becoming mundane and the same. So what I'm hearing is a lot of people not being able to, like, for example, like if a couple that works and they both work, they're now both working from home, but they've never worked together. They don't really understand the tasks that they have to do at each other's offices, right? So like now there's a fight for space in the home, a fight for privacy, a fight for, and maybe fight is throwing too much of a big word, but there's arguments and there's tension and there's friction, like, hey, I need this to serve what I'm doing, and you need that, and like now we are kind of competing for resources inside, who knows, whether that is a one-bedroom apartment or a big house, it doesn't matter. We are now in friction. Right?
And even more so, I suspect, if there's kids around the house that are now needing or demanding a routine, they can't perform schoolwork. It just adds and compounds to the dynamic.
So the thing is, one of the big things that is going to really help people are creating structure and boundaries.
What do you mean by that?
So structure is like when we have, like, let's say my weekly structure, right? Like I can tease it down to by the hour, or I can tease it down by the day or by the week. So like my weekdays, I have a certain hour that I had to go to work, at a place of work, or a certain amount of time that I use, at the office versus a break for lunch versus, when I go work out, or when I do this or when I do that, whatever that routine has been, when I wake up, when I go to bed, when I, so that's structure. To me, that is, I need to figure out a new way of structuring my schedule and my time and my life inside this new containment zone, which is my home, right?
Correct.
And now I have to use the elements and the resources at my disposal, and also I have to figure out the people that are around me and their schedule, their times, and so like that to me is structure.
Right.
Boundaries is the interpersonal communication that I'm going to use with those around me, whether they are on inside my house or in Zoom or however I'm using the resources to be able to execute my structure, right? To be able to stick to what it is, a plan. The third thing that's going to be super important is flexibility. And like, we can be so structured that we don't allow for things to mess our structure up, and then we become agitated, we become aggravated, we become tension rises, and usually when we're escalated, we make less impactful, less meaningful decisions, right? Like, and that's neurobiology too. Like when we are aggravated, we are operating from a different part of the brain and not from our prefrontal cortex, which is the last part that's developed in our brain, which makes good decision making. It's able to outweigh consequences of what we say, what we do. We're now working from our limbic reptilian system, which is the place that actually is the
survival,
the survival,
urgency.
And I think that's where we're all at. We're all in fight or flight mode. Right now,
which makes for a really bad scenario.
It makes for a horrible scenario, right? And we're also dealing with everyone who's in fight or flight mode.
Right. So let's go deep in that, because that's beautiful, and that really takes the topic to a very powerful place. Structure, boundaries, and flexibility.
Yeah.
I want to bounce this off of you, because it sounds to me like these are the very things that can avert the worst pieces of the crisis itself. So people stuck at home, without these tools, they begin to make bad choices, right? Like bad food choices.
Yep.
They begin to act out of a flight or fight space, which creates tension amongst their relationships. They might start making bad financial or unsound decisions,
Correct.
right? Or decisions that are too prompt, too quick. And on top of that, you were saying, hey, depression and anxiety and mental health, they're like the common cold.
Yep.
But you lock people into a quarantine situation, you escalate that to a global crisis, a possible recession, and now that can become the coronavirus of mental health.
Absolutely.
And there's been talk about depression moving into suicide.
Yep.
And these anxiety cases just acting out in behavioral disorders, and people that are, you know, trying to manage chronic diseases, not being able to maintain their routines or their health routines and getting sicker, triggering them to go to the hospital. So help us, if possible, understand as we go deeper into these three tools, how they have such a profound impact or effect on all of these other major consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, when we're talking about being in fight or flight mode, I also want to add freeze, because it's fight, flight, or freeze.
Okay.
Right? Like those are the three things that people end up behaving in. You know, like I either engage something I don't need to engage and I go into a fight mode, and these are very primal, you know, encoded pieces of our reptilian brain that get activated, and sometimes beyond our capacity, right? And beyond our, and like, to me, it's about building capacities through self-care to be able to not go into either one of those modes, right? So to be able to short circuit that very well ingrained way of being. And all three of them are what I would call, you know, activation responses, trauma responses. This all lives in a continuum, and that's a very different podcast and like a very deep conversation.
That'll be episode 2 with Fernando.
But I would add freeze to that, because freeze is also not doing anything, right? Which is part of the depressive side of things, where I just get like stuck. I stop doing. And the anxiety piece is usually an activation of overdoing, right? Like people get very, very, very activated. So to answer your question about how do these things can escalate to major crisis, like what we're not talking about is that people's mental health, you know, like our brain and bodies are connected. I know there's a lot of thoughts out there, or like, I don't know, thoughts. I think people have been taught that we have physical health and mental health. And we haven't moved fully into an integrated healthcare system that actually understands the somatic pieces of our mental health, and like how we, you know, and that is polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve, and how that's connected from the brain to every single part of our body. And that's when people get anxiety, their stomach starts acting out, or they start sweating, right? They start sweating, like that's a physical response to a mental health issue, right? So like we are all one system. We are not two things.
That's beautiful.
You know? Yeah. And so if we're not taking care of our mental health, if we are not really trying to figure it out and put a focus now that we are in containment, how much these aspects of society actually help us with our mental health that are not being now exercised or stimulated because now we're at home, right? So like you said, we can develop, you know, depression, anxiety can escalate into bigger things, and people that are already struggling with bigger things are now stuck not being able to take care of themselves. So like, I'm not just speaking to people that are high functioning that are going to start, you know, degrading. I'm talking to people that are really low functioning, that are not accessing the services and the things and the activities, you know, because it's not just therapy that helps our mental health. It's so many activities that we normally do every day to stimulate ourselves in ways that are helpful to us.
Absolutely.
So we are now stuck at home, and if we don't schedule and create a plan and structure to be able to take care of ourselves, and if we don't use the boundaries and respecting other boundaries, because boundaries goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like my girlfriend, you know, she's beautiful in the way she stresses her own boundaries, right? And like she told me very early on in our relationship, when I come over, there's two things I need you to respect: my meditation and my working out.
Mm-hmm.
Because those two things are the things that keep me level,
Grounded,
mm-hmm. and leveled mentally and physically, right?
Yep.
So like regardless of what I do with my day,
Mm-hmm.
if she chooses to meditate, she chooses to work out, like I need to make that space for her to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So the inverse is true.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that I need for myself? And we all have a different thing, right? And like this is a great time to really self-reflect and start figuring out ourselves. What do I need? Because what I might need might be completely different than what my partner needs, that my kids need. And how do we create a structure where those needs are served?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. And I think that there's a very important junction, a decision that as human beings we need to make. And this goes back to like self-care 101,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because all of us are taught the importance of giving freely of ourselves, of supporting our children, our wives, our husbands, for those of you, you know, and it's almost like instinctively, most of us either automatically place ourselves on second plane, or through belief. Mm-hmm. We might think or believe that, you know, it's not right to somehow place ourselves and make a firm decision that, hey, you know, I have to come first. Mm-hmm. So can we speak into a little bit about that decision and how people can come to it?
Yeah, that dynamic is very tricky, first of all, because we are being taught, especially, I'll say this specifically with women, okay? Like as a male, there's so many things about being a female I will never get to understand. I've observed, I've heard, I've listened to enough women in my life respectfully for them to help me better get their experience, right? And like as men, we need to step up in a lot of ways to help in some of these things. But like we live in a society that teaches us that we need to sacrifice for others, that we need to give, you know, and that, you know, and like that to take is selfish. And like this isn't about selfish or selflessness. This is about having the capacity to show up for other people, right? So like if I want to show up in the best version of myself, I need to take care of myself, right? And the way that I try to explain it is the way that I try to explain self-care is a gas tank, right? Like depending on how big of a gas tank I have, I need to go to the gas station a bunch of different times, mm-hmm. right? So if I have a more fuel efficient car, I have to go to a gas station less times. Mm-hmm. If I have a tank that's bigger in my car, I have to go less times, right? So there's two aspects here to self-care. Mm-hmm. Capacity mm-hmm. and filling up.
Right. How do you define capacity?
So capacity is my tank.
Right, but your tank is dictated by what?
So my tank is dictated by a couple of different things, like how self-regulated I am, mm-hmm. right? So like how do I have my own capacities, internal capacities to regulate myself mm-hmm. first, mm-hmm. right? Because we're talking about co-regulating, mm-hmm. right? If I know how to regulate and manage my own emotions, I am not activating other people in their emotions. Mm-hmm. And that way I'm not engaging in this dynamic, right? So now I'm somebody that shows up more calm, collected, more, and that is not stoic. That's not meaning stoic. That's not meaning I don't have emotions. I have emotions. They are human. They are normal. Anger, anxiety, depression, frustration, all that stuff. The full range of emotions is allowed for everyone. Mm-hmm. But when I'm able to self-regulate myself, I'm actually capable to show up in a way that doesn't add fuel to the fire. It's not the next log that you're going to put on the fire is going to make the fire bigger, right? So capacity for me is the tank. The tank is my internal mechanism to be able to show up. Is my internal mechanism to be able to withstand adversity. Is my internal mechanism, and if I don't clean up the tank, if I don't take care of myself, if I am not staying grounded, if I'm not exercising, if I'm not, waking up on time, getting enough sleep, eating healthy, like doing the things that we know help as a baseline to stay healthy, now I got what I would say rust in the tank, holes in the tank. Like now I have to go to the gas station a bunch more times to fill up. Or I might be filling up in unhealthy ways. Right? Temporarily. With all the wrong fuel. With all the things, with different behaviors. Because we need behaviors that help us self-soothe. Everyone does. And for a lot of people, that might be, watching a show on Netflix to disconnect. But for other people, it's drinking alcohol. Spending. Acting out sexually. Whether that is with other people or through the internet or whatever it is, it's acting out sexually, right? For some people, it's raging and being in control, right? Like people that rage and like always are like trying to be fight a lot. Those are people that always feel out of control. So you need to fight to feel in control of every situation, right? And there's just so much uncertainty right now, so much we cannot control.
Right.
Filling up is the other part of self-care. Filling up is like, what are the things that I can do?
Before we expand on that, it just came to me because I think that in addition to our ability to self-regulate as a way of dictating the size of our tank, it's possible also how much we need to give as individuals, right? If we look at the tank of a mother of four who is also a CPA and accountant, and she has a storm of tax,
no access to no access to childcare, tax season, all these stressors, no income,
versus the young, not necessarily young, but let's say the single or the retiree, or their tank might necessarily stay full longer because they're not necessarily giving that much of themselves. So it's almost like we need to self-reflect and begin to look at, hey, what is my tank? How self-regulated am I right now? And how much is expected of me too? Because, think about the doctors that are on the front line right now, the mental health providers that are on the front line right now. It's almost like these things, in a way, dictate how much we also need to be filling up. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. So, like the way that I would talk about it is like, we all have different demands, right? Like to use the tank analogy and to use the car analogy, we have to drive here, we have to deliver this, we have to do that, and like, we have all these deliverables that life is asking from us, right? And whether that is children, whether that is responsibilities at work, we all have a different set of responsibility, and they all take away from us. We do not have an infinite source of energy that is driving us. We do need two things. Build the capacity of our tank. So how do I expand myself internally, right? And start fueling with the right fuel. So our engines are running appropriately, right?
How do we do that?
So so two things. One, the building the capacity of the tank is going to be a challenge right now, because the building the capacity of the tank really means being able to deal with the things that have been ailing us or haunting us, or that we've been ignoring, right? So like for some people it's past trauma. For some people it is unfinished business from the past. For some people it's grief and loss. For some people, and what the coronavirus pandemic is doing is locking everyone in with themselves. So
we have to look at these.
So
things.
Now all of a sudden we're stuck with ourselves, and a lot of things are bubbling up. And what happens when we haven't dealt with them? They come out sideways. They're going to come out sideways in anxiety, in depression, in fighting, in behaviors. So like the building the capacity is really cleaning up our insides and being able to address things that have been deeply rooted, or things that have been childhood things that have happened, attachment things that have happened with our primary care, our parents, or past relationships. So
past failures, internal or external, right?
Yep, absolutely. So to me, the building capacity has to do with how do we deal with the things that have been that we've been carrying, like the weight of that life has like put on us, right? So that one obviously is a challenge, because that one to me comes through a bunch of different ways, right? Like participating in healing events, whether that is therapy or group or a retreat, and some people don't have access to that. So there's other ways, right? Whether I'm connected spiritually or doing things that are healing and that specifically target the things I've been carrying, right? So there's that, right? Then the filling up the tank are the activities to do daily or weekly in my schedule that actually calm me down, fill up the tank in a positive way. For some people is exercising. All of a sudden they cannot go to the gym because of COVID-19, and now they don't have exercise equipment at home, or their home is not big enough, and or they don't know how to work out without a bunch of different machines or a class or this, and that is really getting creative. And or socially, do I have people that I trust and that I care, that like really love me for who I am, not what I do or what I know or what can I give them, just because of people that love me, for Fernando, right? And I'm very blessed to have those people in my life. A lot of people don't have those. They haven't been able to develop those relationships, right? So like socially, what am I doing? How am I connecting to those people? How am I staying connected to those that I love and that love me? Spiritually, what am I doing with my practices? I'm not a super religious person. I'm not against religion, but that's not what's for me, right? So like, am I doing the things that I do that connect me to a sense of something bigger than me? For some people that's nature. For some people that is, different philosophies. For some people, so like, how am I accessing that now? Am I diving deeper with some reading, with something? Like, how am I connecting to other people that believe the way that I do? That like creates a wholeness in me.
So far, physical exercise, which most of us right now need to start getting creative, finding resources, finding tools that help us be able to maintain our exercise routines at home. If you haven't had one because you've been too busy with everything else that you did outside your door, guess what? What a great opportunity, right?
And there's a lot of different, I don't want to like name drop brands and things out there, just because I'm not an ambassador for anyone, but there's a lot of big company yoga studios. There's a lot of big names in exercise that are actually starting to provide free yoga classes, and there is some great yoga teachers that already have YouTube channels that I've used before. And there is my girlfriend left me a kettlebell and a dumbbell, and I have a yoga mat, and I've been I got friends that are personal trainers that are writing me up different exercises that I can do, and little circuits that I can do at home, literally in the space that it takes to have a yoga mat, or online watching videos, so like all of a sudden we feel forced to like take personal care of not just our self-care, but our motivation to do it.
Right.
Because I'm the guy that does not get motivated easily to do the things that I need to do for myself.
Right. So let's circle back to that, because I think that's really part of the overall picture of what we're talking about, right? Yep. So you talked about physical exercise, engaging with that. Second, you talked about social connection.
Yep.
In your case, and I know in my case too, we tend to work a little bit harder at maintaining some of those vital relationships that we nurture and that nurture us in return.
Absolutely.
So critical in a time like this. But also, as you were saying, the distractions of every day are now gone, and as we go more and more into isolation, then I think it also becomes a great opportunity for reconnection, right? For those relationships that might be important, but that we've become so busy that we've kind of neglected in a way. And I know, looking through my phone in the last couple of days, I'm like, man, there's a lot of people that I really should call and want to call because they're great people and I haven't really reached out in a while.
So I want to make something very clear. There's nothing more degrading and I think degrading would be one term to use, but impacting in a negative way to anyone's mental health and isolation. We are human beings. We are built for connections. Our neurobiology, the way our brain works, the way our heart works, we are built to be, we are social beings, right? On a very baseline, we are built to have to depend and be depended upon from others, right? So there is nothing more impactful. And to me, when and this is a completely different topic, but when you put people in solitary confinement, this is when you see some of the most egregious cases of mental health developing, because what we do when we take connection, we're taking away not just connection, but stimulus, conversation, creativity. We're taking love, we're support, safety. There's just so many things you're stripping away right now because of, and to equate it back to where we're at with the coronavirus, so many of our needs are met by being social beings.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, yes.
So right now, this is a crisis that is going to emerge. The longer we continue in isolation, there is going to be a mental health crisis that it's probably going to go unspoken for, because we are a society that we have a lot of stigma, we have a lot of opinions, right. and you take certain things away from humans, and it is a very normal process that mental health is going to degrade. That is just part of our needs not being met.
Correct. So, and to speak into how true that is, I am so grateful right now for the technology that we have, for Zoom, for FaceTime, for just regular phone conversations, and my patients have told me how incredibly grateful they are, because so many of them are feeling like they're retracted, they're cut off, they're isolated, they're at home, and having someone weekly or bi-monthly check in on them. Hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's everything going? How are you managing your stress, your concerns? How are you handling, your medications, your food, whatever it might be? Just that touch is life transforming, and they tell me over and over again. So the third topic that you brought up was internal connection, spiritual connection, as another strong building piece of self-care during this time. So what should we look for? How does that look like? You spoke about some people find it in belief, other people find it in practice, other people find it in community. So how do we know that we're connected in the way that will be beneficial through this process?
Sure. This is a touchy subject because everyone has a different belief system. And to me, I am the person, I need to remain neutral because of my profession, right? And I have my own belief systems too, but the reality is that I need to be accepting of other people's, right? So so I want to put that disclaimer, right? Because for somebody, they believe yoga is, this, that, or whatever, and somebody's going to believe that a Catholic mass is this, that, or whatever, and so there is no real, to me the standard is, are any of these practices or anything that you're seeking actually bringing wellness, connection, and are they bringing a structure that makes you behave as a better person to others, right? Because a lot of connecting with something that's bigger than me is because it serves me as a way to let me realize that I am one of many, that I am just like the next human being, right? That like gives me a sense of empathy and compassion, right? And that to me, if your practice does that for you, by all means, go for it. Yeah.
Good.
If your practice makes you think that you are right and everyone else is wrong,
and it creates separation. Distance, disconnection.
Yep, exactly. So to me, that's the barometer I go by.
Good.
You know, without getting a little bit too
technical.
Too technical and messy, because you know you have a right to your belief, just like I have a right to mine, and like, but part of my belief is to respect yours.
Right.
You know.
Absolutely. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, Fernando, but I think that when spiritual life is having the right effect, if I may call it that, there's going to be very specific manifestations of that. And in my opinion, part of that might be congruency of what I want and how I act.
Sure.
Right? There might be the ability to embrace, hold, love, and support others in their challenge.
Yeah.
Right? So it's almost like what I'm interested in learning is, how do we know as individuals, how does that look like from a mental health perspective when somebody is connected versus when somebody is disconnected? What are some of the things to look for?
I think it's the concept of holding space. Like truly, when it comes down to, like, it can look a lot of different ways for different people, but I think it's a good time to speak about the concept of holding space. And to me, the concept of holding space is to be able to allow, you know, anyone, hold space for myself, for my own, you know, whatever's coming up, and building that capacity, and holding space for other people's, because right now we're in a place where everyone is in a forced space to have to not able to fully distract ourselves with maybe some of our past failures, maybe some grief from past losses or current losses. We are losing a lot of people are losing money, a lot of people are losing jobs, a lot of people are losing livelihood,
stability, security.
And not just that, there is a piece about grief and loss that people don't talk about a lot, which is the loss of hopes and dreams, the intangibles, where I saw my story go. You know, all of a sudden we are forced to take a massive left turn into an unknown road, right? When I had all these plans and things, and I saw, and I've been working towards a certain life,
right?
And like those hopes and dreams are big losses.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And in many practices, they would call that clinging, right? And they would say that this could be a huge source of suffering, because it prevents us from being present, from pivoting, from shifting perspective.
Having that flexibility that we spoke about.
Having the flexibility, correct.
You know,
correct.
And cognitive flexibility is the ability to be able to shift, giving new information into a new space, into a new way of thinking, or into, you know, as I receive information, right? And one of the things I want to, I guess, plug in the idea of receiving information, right? Like, I'm limiting in some ways the way that I'm receiving my information. I'm trying to get my information directly from medical professionals that are researching COVID, you know, that I have in my life, and not everyone has access to doctors. Like, I'm trying personally to receive my information directly from doctors. Why? Because they are treating medical patients.
That's right.
And why? Because they need the real information.
Right.
That is not sensationalized, that is not overreacted or underreacted, right? Because a lot of people make big things of small things, and some people make small things of big things,
right,
that are really important, and people dismiss those really important factors, right? So I'm trying to get my information from the CDC. I'm trying to get my information from medical professionals that I'm very blessed to have access to. You know, I'm not trying to get all of my information and stay stuck in the pandemic and the crisis. I'm already doing everything I know how to do. I'm being diligent about my washing my hands. I'm being diligent about the way that I cough. I'm being diligent that to have a mask and gloves. I am being diligent to disinfect my cell phone multiple times a day, washing my clothes, washing my hair. Like, I know the things that I can control, and man, that's all. If that's all I can do, then the rest of it is really up to what comes next and what happens and how my life unfolds, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be diligent in the way that I social distance, in the way that, so there's so many of things. What are the controllables versus the uncontrollables,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm doing my part, then I'm consciously being not just for myself, but for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the practices and going back to how do I know spirituality is connecting me and disconnecting me, it's very, it's spirituality to me takes the shape of whatever enclosure you put it in. It's very airy, right? It's kind of like air. You know, you cannot feel, you can feel it, but you cannot see it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, spirituality to me, it's like, you know, if the balloon is a certain shape and I blow into the balloon, that's the shape it's going to take. So I want to encourage people not to particularly practice anything specific, but just to discover mm-hmm. and start connecting to what are the things that you might need to support that part of us. And if you don't believe in that, that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
But to give it a second chance and to just kind of like really wonder, why is it that I don't have that? And so many people through millennia have referred to this.
Right. Yeah.
That's a question to ask too.
Question.
That's a big question.
That might be the question.
You
right?
know, why is it that I don't connect to this?
Right.
You know?
So, you know, as we begin to become a little bit more limited on time, I want to focus briefly on some of the worst aspects of each one of our professions as this pandemic continues unfolding, right?
Mm-hmm.
I suspect, right, that in your world, things like suicide rates,
Yeah.
as people begin to face the worst of possible bankruptcies or markets collapsing or, you know, loss of financial security, if we get to that point, that might happen. People relapsing into addictions.
Yep.
People that are already in active addiction moving to a progressively worse state of their addiction
100%.
or developing co-addictions. In our world, where we work with chronically ill patients, a situation like this is horrific
Mm-hmm.
because stress is immunosuppressive. Being stuck at home, trying to self-soothe, a lot of times people are going to make horrific food choices that are going to make their underlying conditions worse, making their entire scenario around their disease and disinfection way worse for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, you know, some of the tools that you're laying down for us mm-hmm. become very central mm-hmm. in making sure that we don't go down those paths, mm-hmm. you know, and that these patients, whether from a mental health or from a physical health, which at the end of the day, they're one and the same, mm-hmm. right? Don't have to go down those rabbit holes. So if you had the opportunity to speak to each one of those people that are in crisis mm-hmm. right now, that are in this storm within themselves, outside of themselves, what would the messages that you would want them to begin to hear, the voices that you would want them to begin to hear, what would they sound like?
It's a really hard question. I'm just going to acknowledge that. You know, I think like that's a really hard question because so many people and so many different set of circumstances. And you spoke about suicidality and you spoke about a couple of different things and progression into different, the progression of different disorders like substance use disorder or, you know, the way that I'm thinking. So I work with, you know, a company where we do a lot of crisis management and we work with a very wide array of mental health issues, everything from like, you know, active psychosis, thought disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, and they have their own set of problems that they need to manage, right? All the way to substance use, all the way to we work also with eating disorders. We work with relationship violence. We work with human and sex trafficking. I mean, like, we work with a wide array of things that are really complex. I'm also thinking that people that are not going to be able to access their medication, that are going to have psychotic breaks, that have been managing, people that have very stable bipolar 1 or 2, where they're going to start experiencing mania or hypomanic episodes and are going to start decompensating and becoming unglued, for lack of for to use a less clinical term, it's a really hard question, because what I want to say is, like, this is real, like the crises that we are all experiencing, and that this pandemic is exacerbating, are real. And to me, people are going to either slowly deteriorate into a crisis, or they're going to, depending on their capacities, they're just gonna, like, drop into a crisis, right? The more we isolate, us,
Yep.
the more everyone.
Yeah.
This is including me and you.
Right.
Like, I don't think anyone is exempt from, not their mental health deteriorating.
Yeah, and as you said that, it's like this huge light bulb that goes to everything that you just said. The importance of connection. Think about when somebody is planning, preparing, and ultimately executing suicide. They are disconnected. They are isolated. They've isolated themselves.
Yeah.
They've isolated their families, whether physically or mentally, emotionally. So I think that those that are around us, we need to continuously be checking in and connecting, right? For patients that I deal with, that connection becomes critically important. Having a continual point of support, having accountability, having some way of keeping each other in check.
So this is what's really coming up to mind right now. A couple of things. One, communication. You're saying connection, but even making a phone call and the way I communicate are two different things, right? So, like, hey, when somebody's talking to me about a problem, I always ask one question. Hey, is this something you want me to listen to, or is this something you're asking me to help you solve? Because people do need to vent. But me not knowing where you're coming from puts me into a lot of solution-focused listening, where I'm trying to come up with solutions. And, like, I want people to empower them to ask me for that solution. Because if they're asking me for a solution, they're more likely to follow up with that solution, as opposed to me imposing an answer. Right? I might have it. It might be the right answer.
Right.
But because I didn't ask for consent to give them that solution, so every time I'm communicating, a lot of the times I'm not perfect. It's just something that I practice when I talk to people. Hey, is this something you want me to listen to, or is this something that you want me to help solve?
Yeah.
That is a huge shift in a conversation.
Right. Right.
So there's that.
That's huge.
That's huge.
That's huge.
The other thing that I'm thinking about is being able to hold space for each other, right? So what that means is that our new normal is moving, is shifting. Our new normal is that people are in crisis. More people are about to be in crisis. So, like, the way we help each other is taking turns, right? Like, understanding that our connections are give and take. So there's a lot of relationships in my life that people call me because they need something, and the reality is it's not about scorekeeping. It's about contributing to each other. So a lot of people right now are in need. A lot of people right now are feeling that disconnection, and it's one of the reasons why I think we've got to get really creative in how do we self-care in these different areas of what we need. So what I was thinking about the message, I wanted to talk about those areas in different areas that are really important.
Yeah. So while you pull this up, it comes to my mind, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable with the term social distancing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at? Because yes, we have to be physically distant in order to reduce the propagation of the infection, the spread of the infection.
To not overwhelm the medical system.
To not overwhelm the medical
system. Because that is the whole point of social distancing.
That is.
Everybody thinks it's about not getting the virus.
Right, and it's not.
It's not.
Yeah.
Okay.
But outside of that,
sure,
the idea of social distancing, the connotation of that, I have a problem with it. Because this should be really a moment of profound social reconnection, especially because so many of us are going to be undergoing crisis, so many of us are going to be undergoing strife, challenges in so many areas of our lives. So I would say, yeah, physical distancing for sure, but social profound and reconnection, right?
Is 100% needed. Huge. And to me, social distancing doesn't mean emotional disconnection, right? So, like, to me, social distancing, you know, when people, I don't know who comes up with these terms.
Right.
And we all have different definitions to different things, right? And I feel like the way it's intended is to just make sure that when you are in social settings, you're not in X amount of gatherings with X amount of people, and you are socially distant, like, because, but you're right, it's really about the physicality of to disrupt the severity and the frequency and the velocity of the spread of the COVID-19 virus, right? So, like, to me, because we have technology, because we have capacity to connect in other ways, is we need to start having that structure to do so, right? So what that would look like. I have friends that have invited me to have breakfast and coffee on Zoom.
Nice.
Like, literally, like this Saturday, there's a group of people that were like, hey man, we want to have coffee, or we're gonna Zoom it, you know?
Yeah, we had dinner with some of our best friends the
right.
other day. Yeah.
And like, you know, and it's not just Zoom, right? There's a lot of million platforms. You know, I hate like using brands and names because like it doesn't mean that one. It just means the technology is there to connect, right? So there's that piece. And then for me, the other piece that is super important is like, how am I connecting with others? How am I connecting with myself? So do I have structured time that I am taking to do things that I love? You know, do I have the boundaries in my home or with my loved ones to be able to say like, hey, respect this time? You know, hey, we're going to divide the kids in this way. Like, we're going to divide our time even because we need social distancing even inside our homes to be able to connect to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's the balance of like, how do I connect to others? How do I connect with self? Right? Some people use their commute from work for that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where you turn on the radio, you listen to your music, you listen to your podcast, you listen to your book, you make the phone calls you need for the people that are like your people. You're not really, we need autonomy too.
Mm.
So it's like, how do we create this structure inside our homes where we have enough time to connect with others, enough time to connect with self, autonomy, a sense of esteem that is ours, so we're not just moving and reacting, and I'm able to calm down my nervous system so I can respond to crisis as opposed to react to crisis.
Gotcha. So as we wrap it up, Fernando, I know that you have a powerful toolkit to be able to engage in self-care practices during this time. Mm-hmm. I know that you have been gracious enough to offer this tool to be a free download for listeners of the podcast. Can you speak into the tool a little bit and what some of the aspects of the tool are?
Sure. So it's a self-care inventory, and it's basically creating a menu for ourselves ahead of time of what are the activities and things that we do to care for ourselves. And the way that I want to think about it is like, if things that I love to do that I already did, things that I let go of doing because of my lifestyle that I used to really enjoy that throughout life, and some of those we might have to adjust to home, right? And there's different areas of our lives that we self-care. So to drill it down, and those areas are social self-care, physical self-care, leisure, and play. Like, we don't talk enough in society about, like, what do I do to play? Like, we are all grown-up kids. And we all need play and disconnection and things that, like, really we have leisure, joy, pleasure, relationship self-care, work, spiritual aspects of our life, and the emotional aspects of our life. And some of those might bleed into each other, and you might be like, oh, I have a hard time figuring out whether this is emotional or spiritual or leisure. But this is creating a menu of activities, because here's the thing: once our mental health starts deteriorating, we will not seek this menu. But if we figure it out on the front end and we catch ourselves becoming a little bit more helpless, a little bit more disconnected, other people are checking up on us, we can start looking at what are the behaviors and activities that I need to do to kind of up and bring myself, because there's a lot of things for our mental health that we can do for ourselves, that we do not need mental health professionals for, that we do not need, and some things we do, and like, if not, my job wouldn't exist, right?
Right, absolutely.
So what I was thinking is, this used to be a lecture I used to give at a 200-bed residential facility where I used to work and teach at their grad school, and I made this self-care tool both as a lecture, and I also made it as a part of a midterm exam for all of my new clinicians that I was training, right, that are in grad school. And to me, what are the structured things that I can do to take care of myself? And I gotta say this about it. This is a snippet of my lecture, and this was like, there's 1,000 paths up the same mountain. There are things that might be good for you in your emotional self-care that are different from mine, that are different aspects of your social or physical self-care, that, like, I mean, just to give a very concrete example, like, I know you enough to know that you really like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you like Muay Thai, and like all that stuff, and like, I do physical activities differently, completely different, right?
Like jumping out of a plane.
Like skydiving, and like, working out with weights, trying to do like different things, right? So respecting our own self-care and discovering what our own self-care is also gives us an understanding what we respect other people's. Like, there's 1,000 paths up the same mountain, which means we're all trying to get to that peak, but your path might not be the same as my path, and that's okay. I'll say this story about that. I had a friend of mine, I skydive for fun, and I know that's anxiety provoking to a lot of people. That's how I relax. That's a different conversation.
Different topic.
I had a friend of mine that crochets. Two completely dichotomous activities. And she wanted to hang out with me. This was years ago. And I told her, you know what? Why don't you come to the drop zone? I skydive all day. You do your crocheting. We'll hang out in between, all that stuff. We went back at the end of the day, and she got the same sense of creativity, release, contribution, play, focus, that I got serenity. Like, she got all these things out of creating with her hands than I did from jumping out of an airplane. And we were having that conversation on the way back as I was going to drop her off at her home, and it made me realize really deep down inside that, like, whatever it is you love makes you who you are, and who you are is totally cool. Like, you are allowed to explore your own capacities. You're allowed, as long as you are evolving in a way that you treat others better and you treat yourself better and you are connecting, right? So this tool is just an exploration. This is a very basic self-care tool, and this is just for us to have a something to refer back to. Because if I'm a menu of activities. Because, for example, if I'm starting to feeling lonely and disconnected, I can go back to that one sheet of paper and be like, oh, I'm socially disengaging. That's where loneliness comes from. I am socially disengaging. right? If I am super tense and things is like, oh, I'm not playing enough. I'm not doing enough stress relieving, playful activities.
Yeah.
So I can connect almost every relapse to an old behavior, almost every mental health escalation or deterioration to a lack of basic self-care.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's huge.
It's huge.
It's huge. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Fernando. We're living a reality.
Yep.
It sucks.
It sucks.
All of our lives, doesn't matter who you are, where you
Has
are,
been impacted.
has been impacted, flipped upside down.
Changed.
We got to accept it.
Yep.
And in accepting it, we create solidarity, we create connection.
Yes.
Instead of repeating fluffy, hopeful phrases
Yep.
to each other.
Yep.
However, in this crisis is teaching us
Yep.
certain things that seem to be extremely important throughout time.
And basic.
Basic. If we have our health,
Yep.
if we have our mental health,
Yep.
we can get through this.
Absolutely, 100%.
We can, right? If we have financial loss, if we have professional job loss, if we have material loss, all of these things can be lost, and it would hurt. But if we have physical health, if we have mental health, we can rebuild.
And we can show up.
We can show up.
We can show up to tackle whatever those set of circumstances have changed for us. Because for everyone, they're going to be very different. But whatever they are, we can show up in a way that is actually going to be able to rebuild or be able to hold space for what is not good, and we're able to come up with solutions because we're going to be showing up in our capacities. We're going to be showing up in a way that's healthier. We're going to be showing up in a way that can actually contribute to the solutions and not get stuck in the problems.
Right, because if we're panicked, fight or flight, we're
Or freeze.
Or freeze. We're in the reptilian brain where we make the worst possible decisions from, right?
Yeah.
Are the decisions going to be fight, flight, or freeze?
Exactly.
Right? And so, in addition to that, you know, it comes to my mind, so many of us have worked to build up money. Right now, you can't spend your money. On what? You can't travel. You can't fly. Terrible time to buy a house. Many of us have cars. We can't go anywhere, right? The car's stuck in the garage.
Only for essential.
Or only for essential basic things, right? And these things that we seem to strive for so hard every single day, all of a sudden everything's put at a standstill, and it becomes secondary to things that really seem to be way more important, which are the things that really make life up in itself. If I'm not mistaken here, our health, our mental health, our connectivity. So to review, you talked about boundaries. You talked about structure first.
Yep.
Boundaries
to be able to execute that structure.
To execute the structure, and flexibility.
Yep.
To be able to adapt to whatever changes come. And I think that really speaks into the suffering that comes from clinging to what our life was a week ago.
Yep.
It's no longer that, and
We've
it might
lost
never
that.
And it might never
We
be
don't
that
know
again.
that.
We don't know.
Exactly.
We don't know. But if we cling to it, we suffer, and we also lose the ability to adapt to what's to come.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so
It's a great review.
well, I've been paying attention. So in the last piece, when you started talking about self-care, we went really deep on three main pieces: connection, connection with self or spiritual connection, and physical connection, which is exercise.
And that is connecting with self, stimulating my body, and being able to get that, because there's a lot of stress, release that happens there. It's just so much neurobiology and chemistry that happens that is good for you when we do that.
Nice. Beautiful. So any other, outside of the menu that they can self-create once they go through this tool you've created, and this menu of options to be able to both pick the tools that they that they can utilize to improve their internal status, and also as a way of inventorying where is it, why am I being triggered, where's the deficiency, any other main pieces that you want to speak into around self-care before we close?
Redefining happiness, because I think everyone is in the pursuit of happiness. Everyone, all of us, in some way. And I think that this is shifting and shaking our foundation as human beings, you know. And what I really, you know, a lot of people are really and have only been taught that happiness comes from joy and pleasure. And joy and pleasure are a sliver part of what happiness really means. And I like Martin Seligman's model of the PERMA model of happiness. And really the reason I want to bring this up is because it's going to be really, really important to keep inside our homes. How do we redefine happiness? His model is the PERMA model, and it stands for positive emotions, right? Which is the joy and pleasure that everyone thinks happiness is, right? If I can only avoid pain, I will be happy. It's like,
not really.
Pain is inevitable. Suffering is a little optional. Sometimes we choose to stick and stay in that, you know. So positive emotions, engagement, things that engage us, things, and that could be at home, so many different things. Like right now, I'm trying to learn something new, right?
Yeah. So listening to a very empowering podcast.
Yeah, or a TED Talk, or a new book about something that I've never learned about, right? So like something that engages me, right? Then the R is positive relationships. It stands for relationships, right? So what are those people that I'm connected with that bring that really bring a complete set of engagement in my life, like those people that really build me up and can hold space for the good, the bad, and the neutral. The people that really love me, right? I get a complete engagement out of those people. And if you don't have those people, it's time to start building those connections.
Yeah.
What a great opportunity to build those connections, right? Then the M is meaning. Things that bring meaning into my life. And some of those are connected to the self-care, right? Like so some of those things are going to be, you know, the spirituality, or some of those things are going to be, how do my work contribute to this crisis, or how do I get creative to bring contribution and meaning, right? And then the last one, the A, is accomplishments. And to me, accomplishments in this society means like big accolades and stuff. Like, man, to me, an accomplishment is something as simple as like, man, I stuck to my routine.
Yeah.
You know, like, man, I actually proposed myself that I was going to work out 3 times this week, and I've accomplished that. Or like, you know what? I've been able to navigate a hard conversation differently. That's an accomplishment.
Huge.
So like being able to measure my PERMA, which is my happiness, not just from the perspective of joy and pleasure, but actually, what am I doing that's engaging me? How am I taking care of positive relationships? What am I doing to finding meaning? And what am I doing? What am I accomplishing, even if it's small? Keeps my things in perspective. Because if I'm only going to look at happiness through joy, I am going to be a very unhappy person.
Yeah,
it's a recipe. It's a recipe for suffering.
So I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to want to write this down. So
we can put a link down.
Okay, perfect. P for
positive emotions.
E for
engagement, things that I'm engaged in.
R for
relationships.
Very good. M
meaning.
And A for
accomplishments.
Okay, perfect. Fernando, I am pretty sure we've gone over the time, but I have to tell you, this has been one of the best conversations that I've had. As I've worked through it with you, I feel interestingly encouraged, like incredibly encouraged
That's
by
awesome.
looking at the reality squarely,
Mhm.
without fear.
Yep.
Hey, it sucks.
It sucks.
If you go bankrupt, it sucks.
All of this sucks.
All of this sucks.
For everyone.
If you lose someone that's, that really sucks, and that's gonna suck, and there's gonna be pain,
Yep.
there's gonna be loss. However, there is a path
Mhm.
that we can all navigate together in connection.
Absolutely.
And there can be a lot of discovery, joy, solidarity, and true happiness
Absolutely.
based on the PERMA formula if we're willing to navigate through this thing together.
And
Fernando,
take care of ourselves.
and take care of ourselves.
You know why? Because we're the only one that can. Nobody's going to take care of me.
That's right.
I'm the only one that can take care of myself, and you can do it for yourself.
That's
And
right.
so can you. So, love you, brother.
Thank you, Fernando.
Absolutely. It's good being here. And thank you for taking your time. I know that there's just a million things out there to look and watch on the internet, but I really appreciate us taking this time.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. That was good shit, bro.